Hello and welcome to the Mike's DIY Tips channel on YouTube. I'm Mike and this is my second video on DIY solutions where I show you ways of getting around awkward DIY situations and overcoming tricky problems. Let's start with an easy item, how to clean up discoloured or rusty metal. Yes, you can go to ordinary sandpaper, which is a paper base with an abrasive grit facing, but if you want to use it in very fine strips like that, because it's a paper backing, it won't last very long. Much better to use something called Emery Cloth, which you may or may not have seen before. It's actually a cloth backing with an abrasive grit on the front. The grit is graded like sandpaper from about 60 right up to 220. The larger the number, the finer the grit, and therefore the better, finer finish you'll get on your object being cleaned up. This is brilliant because you can tear it in any direction. And it tears in a straight line. So that now is a very useful strip, which I'll show you. If you want to cut sandpaper, you can't tear it straight. You need to cut it with a knife and a straight edge like that. And I'll just start with using that just to show you that it's a bit vulnerable to breaking. The advantage of using a strip is that you can do this sort of thing. See, it breaks quite easily, whereas the Emery Cloth will go tatty first and before it eventually breaks. It will break eventually, but you can get a lot more use out of it. And you can use it by hand like this. A lot more productive when you can get long strokes like this using both hands. You have to work it in different directions, but you get the idea. And you can do it like this by angling the tape. You can do the full circle all in one go like that. Now, we're not limited to using it on wood. If we've got any pieces of wood that have got more or less a rounded shape, you can use the Emery Cloth. Now, here's an example where I use it on wood. Occasionally I do wood carvings, and as you can see, the animal legs are rounded, and it's much easier to use a bit of Emery Cloth round the legs. As you can see, I've torn off a very narrow strip of the Emery Cloth. It's narrow enough to get underneath the body of the elephant to get in around the legs. So I'm now just going to simulate what to do. So we just do that, and by moving my hands into so the Emery Cloth is moving in different directions, then we can attack the leg where we need to get a little bit more wood off. I hope you can see the usefulness of this Emery Cloth. I'm just going to show you one more trick, nothing to do with Emery Cloth, but the same principle. So now we're back to the copper tube again, and let's say we want to give it a polished finish. So now I've just got a strip of ordinary materials. In fact, that used to be my pyjamas, and I've soaked it with metal polish. And so now we use the same principle as we did with the Emery Cloth. But we're not scratching the copper tube now because we're only using metal polish. We're actually giving it quite a good polished finish. Here's quite a common DIY problem we want to put a screw in that bracket to screw it to the wood. The screw hole is very near to this upstanding leg, and whilst I can manage with a manual screwdriver, as soon as I try and use a power screwdriver, we're having to go at an angle because this is preventing this from being vertical. So the tip jumps on the screw head, chews the screw up, and you may never get the screw all the way in, and it's a sport job and a waste of time. And if you're using a power drill as a screwdriver, you've got a fatter chuck, so an even bigger problem of the machine being at an unacceptable angle to the screw head. You can do things like this. That's actually a magnetic extension piece, but it serves the purpose of extending the screwdriver bit, so that's one way of being able to get your screwdriver vertical to drive the screw. A much simpler way is to get yourself one of these long extensions, because then the machine is well out of the way of that leg. Now here's something different. For many years I've always had a working hairdryer in my workshop. It might look scruffy, but it does the job. First of all, it's a dust clearer. That's if you don't mind the dust being scattered elsewhere. Next, if you've got some wet metal that you want to dry, or if the temperature's freezing cold and you don't want to put new paint onto a very, very cold metal surface, warm it up. Then if you've got painted woodwork and you want to strip the paint, you can use the hairdryer. So I've got a nice straight edge paint scraper, and another tip, by the way, if you use this a lot for scraping, eventually you'll sharpen the edge, so be very wary of that. It could be quite razor sharp. As you can see, it's quite a slow process, but if you've got nothing else, this could get you out of trouble for a small area of woodwork. But finally, if you've put fresh paint on some woodwork and you want to dry it quickly to put another coat on, keep the hairdryer a reasonable distance away and don't hold it in one spot, because it could dry the paint too quickly and it will leave a rough finish. Here I'm showing you an outside drain. Well, actually it's in a side passage to the garage, but it has hot and cold taps over, and to catch the drips from the taps I made the drain opening quite wide. But then I had the problem of how to make the drain grid. The grid is not particularly a pretty one, but it's very functional and it is quite strong. It's made out of a typical piece of metal that builders use a lot. It's called builder's restraint strapping. It's perforated, it's galvanised, and it's 30mm wide and 5mm thick, and as you can see the holes are staggered up and down. So what I did, I took 5 lengths with all the holes lining up. I enlarged one hole all the way through and all the way through there in order to insert threaded rods. Now you can buy this and it's called all thread. Comes in various lengths, it's often galvanised, and then you buy your nuts separately. So we needed 2 nuts for each connection point, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's 10 nuts there and 10 nuts there, 20 nuts. And it's quite straightforward. Once you've drilled your hole straight through, all that you do is thread your nuts on and then successively each bar, and then tighten up with spanners. So if you're not happy with the evenness of the gap, just adjust the nuts. When you buy certain DIY components and products, each piece comes with its own self-adhesive label, which is vital for the shopkeeper's purpose, but it's a nuisance for you as the DIY user. You can fiddle with your fingernails and try and peel them back. This one will come back, but it leaves a sticky mess on the piece of wood. This is a piece of moulding. This is a piece of metal strip. And this is a length of furniture board with a nice smooth factory finish, and you don't want to spoil it by scraping. So how do we tackle these adhesive labels if they won't pull off by hand? So what we do is use some white spirit and just thoroughly wet the paper, and likewise with this, and then leave it for a few minutes. And that treatment is just enough to soften the adhesive so that you can pull the whole label instead of the label tearing into shreds and giving you a lot of problems. Same with this one, it's just pulling off completely. Yes, that's just slightly sticky, so is this. So we just give that a bit of a wipe again with the white spirit, and then use a clean dry part of the cloth to wipe it off as dry as possible. That's done those. Now what about this? This one is more of a plasticky sort of label, and it does peel off quite well on its own. But it's very sticky on the wood itself. So we just need to give that a rub with the white spirit on the rag, and that's got rid of the adhesive. Now the white spirit does smell, so hopefully you can do this outside of the house, or if you're inside the house you'll have to put up with a white spirit smell for a little while. And now I want to show you a neat way of quickly marking out the correct position of holes to fix cupboard door knobs. If you're only fixing one knob, then don't bother, but this idea works really well if you've got to fix a lot of door knobs, including wall units as well. So just focusing on this particular cupboard door, I've taken the knob off to show you the principle. On your new door, which hasn't got the hole there, decide where you want to put the knob, which you decide by just holding it in place, and you can perhaps ask the opinion of somebody else in the house as well. When you've decided where you want it, use a piece of paper as a template and just mark where you want the hole to be. Now, these cupboard doors have got a fancy moulded edge, so instead of trying to fix the paper against the edge of the door, position the paper against the edge of the pattern. And when the paper is correctly in place, just mark through the paper with a pencil and then drill your hole. And if it's the other side of the cupboard door, turn the paper around and you can do the same from there. Mark the side of the paper, which must always go down the side of the door, so that you don't accidentally start positioning like that. If you're going to have a handle instead of a knob, you'll need 2 holes. So work out the spacing of your holes from a sample handle. Mark the paper with the second hole. Now the reason I've done 2 is because, bearing in mind that this is always the side of the paper going against the side of the cupboard, you may be having your handle going up that way or up this way. So mark the hole positions through the paper with a pencil and drill. And you can carry on and use the same principle to make a template for marking out the fixing holes for the bracket for a wardrobe hanging rail. So I've used a piece of card here because it's easier to work in confined spaces, it stays rigid. So I've marked the card back, that's the back wall of the wardrobe, top is the underside of the shelf, and you would hold that right up to the top, and there's the holes to be marked using a pencil through the holes in the card. This is a sample of mopstick handrail. It's the type of handrail you mount on the wall to go up the stairs like that. It's good because you can get a good grip on it. But how do you paint it? You can either mount it on the wall on the brackets and then paint it, but you have difficulty getting the paint round the back, and there's always the risk of getting paint on the wall. The alternative is to paint it before you mount it on the wall. So how do we support it so that we can paint all of the surface in one operation? I'll show you how. What I do is suspend the handrail on some string which is wrapped around nails on the edge of an overhead shelf. Down here I've used a screw eye like that into the flat part of the handrail. So this is the bottom, that's the correct way up of the handrail. And if you work out the position of your handrail brackets, you can put the screw eye into that, somewhere in that distance there, so that when you finish painting and you've mounted the handrail on the wall, you haven't got any extra holes to fill up. If you're left-handed, work from left to right, because you're painting with your left hand, and the right hand not only steadies the handrail, but you can rotate in order to do the painting of the side out at the back, and then just work your way around. If you're right-handed, you work from right to left. The only thing about this system is that you have to suspend the handrail somewhere convenient where you can leave it while the paint dries for 2 or 3 days. Well, that's the end of my second video on DIY solutions. I hope all those ideas will help you out in the future, sorting out your own little DIY problems and finding the best solution to achieve the result that you want. If you like my videos, there's some icons coming up on screen now that you can click. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching, and I hope we'll see you again very soon.